Hello again, everyone. Sorry you'll be sick and tired of me by the end of this. Who here has been familiar with, I guess, previous versions of the CMA's BBC MOU? Lots of hands up, which is good. Who here feels that he actually ever used the CMA BBC? Slightly less, but some hands up. Good. But what about more recently, in the last couple of years? Fewer hands, but still some. Excellent. Okay. Well, that makes me feel a little better. Essentially, you may recall that back in April, as part of a survey that we put out there about the Ofcom key commitments documentation and that consultation, there were also some questions in that survey about community radio stations' relationships with their local BBC station. And I don't think it's on the website yet, but hopefully in the coming days you will see a report about that survey, which has helped us with creating a new look BBC MOU, and I will be talking more about that shortly. So let me see if the slides work. The down arrow.
Our survey said.
Hooray, it works. So we asked you some questions, and put that down. We got 47 responses, which was very helpful because ultimately we wanted a new look, revised BBC Memorandum of Understanding to reflect what some of our members were interested in. Do I have to press this button really hard or something? Okay, there we go. We asked a question in order to get a delightful graph about how involved community radio stations were with their local BBC station. As you can see, the vast majority, over half, said there was essentially zero relationship with their local BBC station. And I've spoken to lots of stations, and I can accept, for many, that's intentional, and you have absolutely no plan to get involved in your local BBC station, and that's absolutely fine. But we also found out that quite a few stations would quite like to have some sort of relationship, which is what this MOU is all about. I'm going to have to press this button twice in order to make it.
Our survey said.
There you go. Enough of that. So, oh no, I skipped one. Here we go. Feel like there we go. Right. So, we discovered that there was some really interesting data that came from the survey. No BBC station has ever approached us, neither have we approached any of them, was quite often the sort of thing we were getting. But on the other hand, some stations had really positive anecdotes and talked about projects with their local BBC station. And speaking further with some stations, ultimately, a lot of this seemed to be historical. So like once upon a time, a station tried to establish a relationship with their local BBC station, it didn't work out for one reason or another, and that was the end of it. And I think ultimately we thought this was a good opportunity to get some howl around. A good opportunity to sort of rewrite it, like to wipe the slate, start again. So CMA members, should they want a new relationship with their BBC station, they can start now. There's obviously a knack to the next slide, isn't there? Anyway, so some stations benefited from content sharing, there were some volunteer opportunities, some stations, community stations, really benefited during the pandemic with BBC stations supplying updates and interviews and things like that. But again, as you could see from the earlier points, that's the minority. The vast majority didn't have that sort of relationship. There we go. I think we are aware that local BBC stations have had some changes recently, and that came through in the survey. Lots of the responses we had were along the lines of, my local BBC station's cutting back, I don't think they're really going to want to do anything with us. But they do. That's the point. They do want to reach out and work alongside you and be, invite you in and have conversations and make those connections. Ultimately, what came through in the survey is that there was a lack of formal dialogue between a lot of our members and local BBC stations. So we asked questions as well about if you thought of any potential benefits that there could be. Training came up a lot, content sharing came up a lot, technical support as well. And so these are all things we wanted to feed in to a New Look MOU, including regular meetings, maybe working together on events and campaigns, formal communication channels. That was really important. I was on the roll there with the button pressing. There we go. So, there is a New Look BBC MOU, and it's going to be published on our website very soon, and it's setting out to provide, I guess, a starting point for CMA stations to work closely with their local BBC station in their area. BBC local, let's get the right way round. So there are lots of advantages to it. I'm not going to read the slides, but there are lots of advantages, not just for CMA members, but for the local BBC as well, and that's reflected in the New Look MOU document. This is what you're seeing here is all taken off the new document, which is going to be on the website, by the way, so you will be able to read some of this in your own time soon, and hopefully you will utilise this. CMA members might benefit from long list. That's not to say that all of these things will happen, but these are the sorts of things that could happen should we foster more positive relationships. So, a new thing in the BBC MOU was to do with Cat 1 obituaries. So, as everyone will remember, not long ago, we had one of those when the Queen sadly died, and we had in my community radio station in Luton, the University of Bedfordshire, we had already had conversations with our local BBC station, which is Free Counties Radio in Dunstable, to establish a protocol for this, actually based on something that Jamie had done in a few years earlier, a presentation at the CMA event. We had already, it was written and decided, should the Queen sadly die, we were going to take Free Counties Radio until we decided it was safe to take some other programs.
Back on the air.
Yeah, put our students back on the air. Yes. So that's exactly what we did, and it took a couple of phone calls and just to establish it. Go on, Pete. Shut up.
Just a quickie.
Yep.
At Radio Kent, they told us we couldn't take the Queen's. They wouldn't let us take it at all.
Well, that's interesting, and maybe this New Look BBC MOU will change that.
Secretary as well, sorry.
Yep, go on.
Did the local radio stations, BBC Local, they just relayed Radio 4, didn't they? As a national service.
They did for a short while,
And then they did return.
and then they had some local programming.
Right, okay.
It was quite. I think I won't go into the details, but
That's fine.
I think because of what happened with Prince Philip the previous year, the BBC seemed to have learnt some lessons in how to quickly move on to some sort of more upbeat version of the obituaries, and it was quite fascinating to take that programming and hear it on our station. Another big thing from the MOU, which I'm happy to take questions on and talk more about, is the launching of something called BBC Local CMA Affiliates, which essentially, if you are a CMA member, are interested in partnering up, working alongside the local BBC station in your area, you will be hopefully invited to biannual meet the team sessions at that BBC station, and the list will be published online as well of the stations that have chosen to take part in this and establish positive relationships. The idea of this is as well that the community stations might be a port of call for the local BBC station when they want to reach out to that target community. So in Luton, for example, where I'm based, we have a CMA member who, Inspire FM, who are for the Islamic population in Luton. And so it makes sense for Three Counties Radio, should they wish to get someone that is from the Islamic population of Luton, to speak to Inspire FM and engage with them, as well as invite them in for these Meet the Team sessions. So that's the gist of the idea. I've got here some quotes which are taken from the MOU, one from Chris Burns, who's the BBC controller of local audio commissioning, and one from me. But rather than read a quote, we thought it would be a good idea to give you Chris herself. So if technology has worked, and it looks like they're doing something over there, and I can see that, but I don't know if you can yet. Well, here we go. There she is. So please welcome Chris Burns, the BBC controller of local audio commissioning. Hi, Chris. Hopefully you can hear us, but I think we would just like to get a few words from you about why, I guess, the BBC CMA MOU was something you were happy to and actively wanted to pursue.
Well, look, I think, first of all, thank you for inviting me to join you today. I'm sorry I'm not there in person. But look, I think all of us are committed to local, and it makes sense for us to work together where we can. No one is forcing anybody to enter any kind of relationship, but I think very often it's mutually beneficial. And if I look at some of the things going on at the moment, in London, they have the partnership there. I've heard you talking about how you've been working with 3CR and how they've supported you. If you look at how we worked together during lockdown, there are lots of benefits, I think, by all of us coming together when it's mutually beneficial for all of us. So I think what I want it to be is a real partnership, and not one side feeling that another is kind of taking over. It's a genuine partnership. It's there. It's quite broad in terms of how we can use it, but use it hopefully to the benefit of all parties.
Brilliant, thank you, Chris. And what I thought would be good, once we have a few minutes, is to get more points from the people in the audience, questions you might have, or suggestions for ways in which we can work together. And if it's more appropriate for Chris to respond, then we can get Chris to respond. If more appropriate for me, then it'll be me. Have you got, doing a roaming mic, is that the plan here? Looks like it might be. Brilliant, thank you, Susie. So if we can get the gentleman over there. Hello.
Yeah, Steve Haig of Radio 9 Springs. Hello, Chris. I did mention this to you when we met up in London at the DCMS about emergency messaging. When we're in Somerset, so there's an emergency, a gas leak or a flood. Joining up with the BBC station on joint coverage of an emergency and putting it out through the community radio stations would give blanket coverage across the county with information about the emergency. So I think what I would like to see is this formalised between us and, in our case, BBC Somerset, so that when the emergency happens, within an instant, we have this partnership in place and ready to go. It isn't in place at the minute. We know that coming up to the bad weather, we're going to get flooding in Somerset, maybe on the levels or wherever. And I think this will be a great starting point, for building the partnership and making it more successful. So emergency messaging, joining up community radio stations with the local BBC station in the event of an emergency in the broadcast area.
Brilliant, thank you. So did you catch all that, Chris?
I think I caught the gist of it. It was basically when there's any emergency that takes place in an area, we kind of join up together. Yes. And I think this has happened previously in Somerset, and it's certainly something I'd be very supportive of. I know in Australia they have a very formal relationship with community radio there that operates when any of the bushfires take place, because clearly you're dealing with situations that are changing at a very, very rapid rate. But I definitely think that's something that we can pursue and try and kind of have, I suppose, almost a recognised workflow that kind of just comes into being, just as we do when other disasters occur, so that everybody knows what they should do.
It needs to form part of the emergency.
So we can definitely look at that.
It needs to form part of the emergency plan for Somerset with the emergency planning team at the council. But it needs us all to work together to approach the council to get this put in place. As part of the emergency plan, we have nuclear power station, something could go wrong there, Hinkley Point. You know, these things can happen and do happen, and we need to be ready, you know, for when it does happen, to be the first point of contact and the first place for putting out the information.
Brilliant. I mean,
yeah.
It sounds like the MOU for you is a framework to sort of continue some more conversations with BBC
absolutely.
Somerset. That's excellent.
Okay, thanks.
Chris, am I right in thinking, Chris, that you've had some conversations with those in charge of BBC local stations already about this?
Yes, we had a meeting with the senior leadership team last week, and I've taken them through the memorandum of understanding, and all the senior heads of content production, they're all very supportive of this. And you know, what I will do following on from your meeting this weekend, providing everyone is supportive, is I will share this also with all the audio exec editors next Thursday when I'm due to meet them. But you know, I know Jason Horton, who's the director of production, is supportive, and as I say, all the senior heads of content production are supportive to try and make this work.
Fantastic. Any other questions from the crowd? There's I think Michelle over there. Susie's coming over with the microphone.
How much will you encourage your editors to follow this arrangement? Because in the past, our relationship with BBC Essex has been a little bit intermittent at times, and the editor last year promised me a copy that I'm still waiting for.
Did you catch that,
Right.
Chris?
I think I caught that, which was basically how are we going to encourage our editors to kind of make this come to life. Well, look, I'm sorry if you didn't have a good experience, but I will share this, as I say, with the audio exec editors. I know the senior heads of content production, who the audio exec editors work to, are supportive of this. So we've just got to kind of try and make it happen. And if there are particular problems or you're finding you're not getting through, then if you can let me know, then I will take that up with the relevant senior head of content production.
Brilliant. And if you do need to let Chris know, you can come through us as well, and we can raise that as part of our meetings that we will be having with BBC Local about this.
You know, and to be fair to, you know, I wasn't involved obviously in the correspondence you had last year. Last year there was an awful lot running, and I know sometimes I can miss emails and I have things on my to-do list and I have the best intention to get to them, and sometimes I forget. So if you don't hear it first, then I would encourage you also to send a gentle reminder as well.
Brilliant, brilliant. Any other questions or ideas? Yes.
Hi, Ali Beg from Awaz Radio in Southampton. What does the MOU say about working with ethnic stations? Because most BBC local radio stations don't have an ethnic service. So how does this MOU work with ethnic stations?
Did you catch that, Chris, about how the BBC MOU could work with ethnic stations?
Sorry, I didn't catch that. Can you just say that again?
Yeah, Ali was asking about if the BBC CMA MOU can mean that local BBC is working more with ethnic community radio stations.
Absolutely, and it does happen in some parts of the country already. I know, for example, at WM, there's a very strong connection with the ethnic community radio stations in that particular area. And the producer, in fact, of the Monday night show not only works for us and the Asian Network, but also is very heavily involved in that station as well. So it's happening in parts of the country, and clearly if it's not happening in your area, let me know, and I'll see what I can do, because I know Ian Ramsdale will be very supportive of working more widely with people.
Fantastic. That sounds positive. Any other questions or points? Dom over here, Susie.
Hello, Chris. We are familiar to each other, and on this
We are
particular
indeed.
subject, thanks for joining us today. One of the outcomes of previous versions of the MOU with the CMA was to facilitate conversations where community radio-generated content could find its way comfortably onto the BBC local radio networks. I'm sensing that with the 4-hour kind of programme scheduling that's now come about since the COVID period, that actually presents a bit of a challenge. Would you personally like to see some of those relationships? As you know, I'm from Somerset, where we've had a very strong relationship with BBC Somerset and Bristol over the course of time. I think it would be great if we could see community radio content in the form of, say, community radio, either presented or produced shows going out on their BBC local radio stations as a way of cross-pollinating, serving those audiences together. Is that something you'd like to see perhaps return a bit more?
Yeah, and it is happening in Cornwall, and I know it happens on BBC Radio London as part of their evening shows. So, you know, it is happening. I think with all of these things, you know, there is a framework. There isn't necessarily a route map, and I think, you know, the best creative ideas come when there's a sort of an open and a genuine conversation. And I don't know of a single editor who would turn down a good idea. You know, last year we were also very heavily involved with the Audio Lab project that was run by Sounds. So, you know, I think there are lots of opportunities there. My plea would be, don't censor yourself by perhaps what's happened in the past. We've got an open door here. Let's work out how we can work together now. And I would say, certainly from the dealings I've had with editors and to working in partnership with you.
I think we're cutting out a little bit there, Chris, but it's probably it's time for us to think about lunch and things like that, isn't it? So
I was going to say, I'm holding people back from lunch. It's never good to be the person there just before lunch.
No, we really appreciate you joining us today. It's Chris Burns, the BBC Controller of Local Audio Commissioning. Thank you. And again, if you have any questions about the new look BBC MOU, it will be published on the website relatively soon, and we'll be happy to talk about it in the meantime as well. Thanks, Susie.
Thank you. Can I just say a massive